Imagine you're a parent, 78,000 years ago, East Africa, a cave near the coast. Your child, 3 years old, has just stopped breathing. No hospital, no doctor, no grief counselor, no funeral home, no religion with a name, no scripture telling you where they went. Just silence, and the weight of something your species has never had a word for yet. What do you do? What did any of them do? Before we can answer that question, we have to sit with a number that is almost impossible to process. In the ancient world, roughly half of all children died before the age of 5. Not in a war, not in a disaster, just life, a fever, an infection, a bad winter, a moment of bad luck that modern medicine would handle with a single prescription today. Half. Which means every single adult who has ever lived before the modern era almost certainly knew what it felt like to watch a child die. A sibling, a neighbor's child, their own. And yet almost nothing survives to tell us how they felt. No journals, no therapy notes, no records of grief at all for most of human history. So we had to look somewhere else. We had to look at what they buried. In 2021, archaeologists in Kenya made a discovery that stopped the academic world cold. Inside a cave called Panga Yasaidi, they found the remains of a 3-year-old child deliberately buried 78,000 years ago, the oldest known intentional burial in Africa. But it wasn't the burial itself that was remarkable, it was how it was done. The child had been placed carefully on their side, knees drawn gently toward the chest. A soft, perishable material, perhaps leaves, perhaps animal skin, had been placed beneath the child's head, like a pillow. Someone had tucked this child in, 78,000 years ago, in a cave with no written language, no organized religion, no concept of an afterlife that we know of, and someone still took the time to make sure the child's head was comfortable. That single detail changes everything we think we know about ancient grief.
Most people assume that in a world where death was everywhere and constant, ancient humans simply got over it faster, that grief was shorter, shallower, that when you expected to lose children, you somehow felt it less. Researchers have actually studied this assumption, and they found the opposite. Modern hunter-gatherer groups believe that death is natural and inevitable, but there are two exceptions: death through trauma and the death of infants and children. Even in societies where child death was common, the death of a child was treated as categorically different, not normal, not expected, something that broke the rules of how the world was supposed to work. Which raises an entirely new question. If the grief was real, and the evidence says it was, how did people survive it without any of the frameworks we use today? Here is where the archaeological record becomes almost unbearably human. In a cave in northwestern Italy, researchers found the burial of a young infant nicknamed Knave, directly dated to around 10,000 years ago. Associated artifacts indicate significant material and emotional investment in the child's interment. What were those artifacts? Decorated shell beads, pendants, objects of obvious care and beauty, placed deliberately with a child who was only weeks old, a child who had barely lived at all, given the full burial and the full grave goods of a valued community member. The community would have brought along ochre, ground up or used whole, believed to have held both medicinal and symbolic roles in the practice of care and death in prehistory. Using the same pigment for both nursing and funerals reveals a new side of prehistoric life. The same substance used to tend to the sick was used to honor the dead. They weren't separating care from grief, they were treating them as part of the same act.
But then the discoveries get stranger. In prehistoric Anatolia, infants were buried beneath house floors. Even after the appearance of extramural cemeteries, babies continued to be interred under house floors. Think about what that means. The family didn't bury their child away from home, in a designated place for the dead. They buried them underneath where they lived, under the floor they walked on every day. Archaeologists debate why. Some believe it was about keeping the child close, some believe it was about protection. The idea that the spirit of a child buried beneath the home would watch over the family still living above. Either way, the choice tells us something profound. These parents didn't want distance from their grief. They built their lives on top of it, literally. They chose to stay close to the thing they had lost. Here is the bigger revelation, the one that connects every one of these burials across tens of thousands of years. Grief for a child isn't a cultural invention. It isn't something a religion created or a civilization decided to adopt. It is evolutionary. It is built into the architecture of a species that spent millions of years in a world where raising a child to adulthood required enormous investment, enormous risk, and enormous love. The depth of the grief is proportional to the depth of the bond, and the bond had to be deep because survival depended on it. Which means ancient humans didn't cope with child loss by feeling it less. They coped by building, deliberately, tenderly, carefully, the very first rituals our species ever created. The pillow beneath the head, the red ochre on the skin, the shells placed alongside a body that had never had the chance to wear them in life. The child kept close, beneath the floor, still part of the home. These weren't primitive attempts at something we do better now. These were the beginning of everything we still do. So how did ancient humans cope with the death of a child? The same way we do, imperfectly, incompletely, with objects that can't possibly be enough, in rituals that feel necessary even when we can't explain why. The oldest burial in Africa is a 3-year-old with a pillow beneath their head, placed there by hands that are dust now, driven by a feeling that has never once changed in 78,000 years. Grief didn't begin with us. We inherited it. And somewhere in that inheritance is the uncomfortable, extraordinary truth that the people we think of as ancient and unreachable felt exactly what you would feel, exactly what any parent has ever felt. The species changed everything. The love never did.